of this recording, Adventure Time has just wrapped up its 10th and final season with an epic 45-minute finale that, despite the scale present through a majority of the episode, never forgot about what made it special and cherished by millions, delivering a perfect ending to a wonderful series. But with any ending to a long-running show, its ending causes a moment of silent reflection, and as the final song played through the end, I found myself silently absorbing not just what happened in the finale, but my time with the show in general, and how shockingly important it's been to me over these many years. Adventure Time was a show that was not only delightful, insightful, and consistently creative, but also one that was really a landmark in how it told its stories and developed its characters in the genre of kids animation. It aimed not just to have silly adventures, although there are plenty of those too, but also sought to express certain truths. Truths about humanity, creativity, desire, mental illness, and so much more, all through very creative means that don't make it obvious that that's what they're talking about. And they did so slowly, starting the show as just weird 11-minute vignettes where seemingly any random thing can happen. The only thing that seemed consistent, at least at first, was that it all seemed to circle around Finn the human and Jake the dog. Other than that, anything goes. But as time went on, the show began to develop not only a more complex lore, but also a more complex heart. And because you're already invested in the world and the people in it, you're much more susceptible to what it has to say, and as such can help teach kids lessons that they need to learn about the world without realizing that's what they're doing, while at the same time building up a huge adult audience that feels a personal connection to what's being presented on screen. And yeah, I would definitely count myself among those people that discovered the show as an adult and found that, defying all my expectations, it proved to be the show that would help me conquer not only grief, but also severe depression. Now, to give a little background, I was actually introduced to the show about 4 years ago when I was 22 by our very own Muha, who convinced me to give it a shot because, let's face it, if you're not already a fan of the show and know what it's about, it's pretty easy to write it off as just another weird kids show. But as I'm sure you'll figure by now, I started to watch the show and yeah, got slowly hooked into the wacky sense of humor, complex lore, and eventually well-written character drama. I found myself watching it more and more whenever I got home from college. It served as a good distraction at the time, and I turned to it whenever I needed a break. I was still living with my parents at the time, and we had 2 dogs, a Pomeranian and a Yorkshire Terrier. It's worth noting that I didn't get to pick the breeds. Anyway, their names were Cricket and Rascal respectively. They're both dogs we've had since I was around 10. We got them at the same time, and I even came up with the name for Rascal. I took him out at night, he slept in my bed, he used to watch TV with me late at night when everyone else was asleep. He was my pup, and I loved him. But he was getting older, getting harder to control himself, a lot of sinus issues, very sluggish. By 2014, we all secretly knew his time was coming pretty soon, but nothing ever really prepares you for the moment it happens, does it? And it didn't happen peacefully. My mother and I were the only ones at the house at the time, and we just dropped both dogs off to get groomed. I was young and actually had afternoons off back then, so I went back to sleep. Apparently, though, my mom got a call from the groomer saying Rascal wasn't doing so well, so she went to get him. When she gets back, she yells at me to get up and hurry. After I did so, I just see my mom just standing there at the base of the stairs, holding Rascal, and said, "He's dying." He had a massive stroke on the drive back. It didn't take long. It felt like an eternity, though. My mom and I sat by him until he passed, and after what felt like a lifetime of shallow breathing, with just enough time to say goodbye, he did exactly that. For obvious reasons, neither my mom or I were doing particularly well in that moment, but I didn't want to put my mom through any more grief than she needed to, so I decided to take on the brunt of the work, trying to be the pillar of support so she can grieve to the best of her abilities. If I'm being honest, I have no idea how well I succeeded at being that. I was a pretty huge wreck at the time too, but I did my best. I was lucky enough to grow up with a pretty big backyard, and in the back corner we had this huge pepper tree. We wrapped him up in a towel, and I spent a large part of the afternoon clearing a path through thick roots and ivy to clear enough dirt to bury him at the base of the tree. Trying to stay as strong as I could to do what needed to be done, taking as few moments to cry as possible. It sucked. Afterwards, I left to go grieve alone in my room, and I just wanted something, anything, to distract myself from the pain, so I put on Adventure Time. And it only made things worse. Why, you may ask? Because one of the first episodes I happened to watch, for the first time, mind you, was Son of Mars. For those of you who know this episode, you'll probably know where I'm going with this, but for those who are not familiar, it's the one where the dog temporarily dies. Like, at least 2 people hold his dead corpse dies. Oh, don't worry, he comes back in the episode, but I didn't get that far because I was too busy yelling, "Are you fucking kidding me?" at the screen. But the show wasn't done with me yet that week, as the following episodes in that same season would be about coming to terms with what's beyond your control and giving yourself permission to move forward, as demonstrated by the very next episode, Burning Low. Or even accepting things as they are, no matter how heartbreaking and painful they may be, as demonstrated by I Remember You. These episodes, coming so soon for me after losing an animal that loved me unconditionally, was something I very much needed, whether I wanted to admit it or not. While it didn't fix my pain or make my grief go away, it helped me find the tools myself to work through it. It took a long time to get to a better place from that, but oddly enough, it was rewatching Son of Mars, an episode I avoided like the plague for a long time for obvious reasons. That was one of the biggest helps in moving on. Mostly because the association between tragedy and that episode was so tightly knit that the first time I tried to watch it again, I burst into tears. But at the same time, it gave me a way to confront it, to take away the power grief held over me. It allowed me to finally break through the last barrier that was keeping me from healing. The need to hold on to the pain that, while awful, also kept a part of him close. This is when, for me, the show stopped being entertaining escapism and turned into something much more personal. One thing that made the show special and kind of groundbreaking for kids' cartoons up to that point is that the characters in it actually grew up as the show progressed. So both Finn and Jake would look, sound, and act older as the show went from season to season. And since Finn is a teenage boy, one who went through more trauma than most, he too had to face the unspoken hardships of life and learn how to cope with them if he couldn't conquer them. So as I got older too and learned the many harsh lessons I would learn from college, returning to Adventure Time to see how Finn was growing up too became a continued source of comfort. While there were still plenty of silly moments and adventures to be had, they carried with them the weight of experience. And seeing that brought me some hope, or at least some enjoyment, as depression, anxiety, and loneliness frequently took their toll on me. I was depressed through most of college, actually, struggling to figure out who I was and who I could trust. It was a dark, confusing time. I remember intimately times when I had to pull over when driving home because I was having a nervous breakdown, or times I had to excuse myself because of an intense anxiety attack. It was something I told very few people about, and even the ones I did, I don't think understood the full extent of it. So watching Adventure Time became more and more like visiting an old friend who always knew what to say. That is, until the episode in season 6 called Breezy, where, after a series of heartbreaking events that span over several seasons, Finn too has found himself falling into a deep depression to the point where he feels nothing except the numb darkness. He attempts to party and make out with various princesses throughout the land in an attempt to feel something, anything really, but finds that no simple pleasure can relieve the hollowness he can't escape from. Meanwhile, he runs into a bee named Breezy who becomes obsessed with a part of him and confuses it for love for the whole. Eventually, Finn is able to pull himself from his depression by essentially realizing that superficial attractions and distractions won't make you feel anything if your basic emotional needs aren't being met. Granted, it doesn't say that explicitly, but that's my interpretation anyway. Naturally, this episode messed me up pretty bad, but not in the way you might think. I've mentioned before in a previous editorial that fictional characters are important because they help us feel understood. And for me, Breezy served as a wake-up call. It gave me the chance to feel understood in a way I desperately needed at the time, which gave me courage to start trying to do something about it. It didn't fix the problem, but it helped me start working to make myself better, and it's been a long, difficult road to do so, but I've made a lot of progress in that time. And as the show kept going, it kept dealing with more and more difficult subject matter in a way that taught me how to cope and how to be. And now that the show is over, I think I finally realized the most important lesson that the show taught me that I haven't thought about much until now. I think the reason why it helped so much with overcoming grief, coping with depression, and helping me grow as a person is because at the end of the day, the show taught me that sooner or later, everything is going to be okay. When you really think about it, that is one of the biggest reoccurring themes throughout the show. It doesn't say all problems can be fixed, or that changes won't happen, and that people won't change, but it does say that despite all of that, everything is going to be fine. No matter what happens in the past, present, or future, you will always eventually get back to that place where you can smile and laugh again. This is something that is arguably highlighted in the last song Rebecca Sugar wrote for the show called Time Adventure, where she says, and I quote, "And we will happen again and again, because you and I will always be back then." Throughout Adventure Time, we watch these characters go through difficult situations, some in which they could do something to fix it, and other times when nothing can be done to change a thing. Sometimes a person can't change no matter how much you want them to. Sometimes you'll break someone's heart and you can't fix it. Or maybe sometimes you can repair a relationship with a family member. Sometimes you can bond over something silly. Whatever it is, good or bad, it's all happened, and it'll probably happen again. So enjoy the good times when you can, but when the bad times happen, it's important to remember that the good will always happen again, sooner or later. Since I started watching this show, I've gone through grief, depression, suicidal ideation, crippling anxiety and loneliness, and self-loathing. But all the while, I feel like I had a friend in Adventure Time to remind me that everything is going to be okay. And for that reason, Adventure Time has been, and likely always will be, one of my favorite TV shows of all time. So I would like to end this video by saying thank you to the show and everyone involved with it for taking us onto very distant lands. I'll never forget it.